Electric Jam Podcast.
Greetings and salutations, everyone. Welcome to the Electric Jam Podcast. I'm Christopher, and I'm here with Richard. If you don't know who we are, check out our website in the description of the podcast. Electric Jam has guitar reviews, gear testing, and tons of info on recording. Richard, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you very much. The weather's a balmy 19 degrees in the United Kingdom, so it's actually got some good weather for the first time in what seems like about 12 months.
Yeah, it's just hot here.
It's hot here, but it's typical kind of, it's just overcast and really humid. But the sun was out for like 10 minutes a while ago, so I got to enjoy that for a little bit, which was nice.
Yeah, it goes from wintertime here to, it goes from you're using the heater one day to you're turning on the AC the next day. Like just 2 weeks ago, it was, 59 degrees during the day, and now it's like 80.
Ooh, what's that in normal temperature?
and normal temperature that everybody else uses. 80 would be like, I think 22.
Okay, so that's not too bad. I mean, it's 19, 20 degrees here today, so that's kind of warm for the UK.
Hot enough for.
Well, let's say this. A couple of years ago, it got to 40 degrees here, that was just insane. I mean, the roads were melting. People were just freaking out. It was like the end of the world.
Well, I mean, yeah, roads melting. I can imagine. Okay, so it's 15.5 today.
Okay, so it's actually warmer here.
Hold on. No, I used the converter wrong. It's 26.6.
Oh, okay, that's pretty hot. That'd be like a hot summer's day here.
Yeah, it gets up to, in the summertime here, 37.7 is the usual day.
Yeah, that's hot. It never gets. I mean, it gets hot here occasionally, like on occasion. Like we had a 40 and a high 30s last year, but nothing like that, and it's not consistent either. I think we had 4 days when it was like super hot, and it was because the UK's we're not like outfitted for that kind of weather. Like no one's got air conditioning. All the houses are like insulated to hell because it's cold most of the time. So when it's hot, it's like an oven. It's ridiculous. And the roads melt, and people start jumping off roofs, and it's just a mess. Yeah, I can't handle it. When it's either too cold or too hot, we're basically screwed. It needs to be sort of just temperate constantly, or else everything falls apart.
Well, I expect it can only get worse. But in good news, there's the new Tone X1. The Tone X is not a modeler. I think this is where people kind of get messed up with the Tone X. It's not a modeler per se. What it does is it captures the sound of your amp in your speakers. And then you can save that on the Tone X device. The cool thing about that...
So hang on a minute. So I'm confused. So it basically takes an audio capture of the sound that's coming like natively from your amp, and then converts it, and you can use it as like a digital sound.
Correct. So if you have 10 amplifiers at home, and like let's say you have a few Marshalls and you have a 5150 and you have a few different amplifiers, and you would love to bring them all on the road, but that's like not you can't do that unless you're a millionaire.
Oh, yeah.
I think we talked about that last week, but you could capture all of those amps and then put it into the Tone X device and use that as the platform for your entire sound.
Okay, so that's kind of like XFX a little bit.
A little bit more like the Kemper.
Yeah, the profiler.
Yeah. So this kind of, but it's a one-to-one copy of your amp. Like if you put it on a spectrogram and you record a track with your amp and then you reamp it through the Tone X, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
No way.
It is that accurate. So the big one costs about $400, which I think is a killer deal anyway, because there's a whole community where people upload their amplifiers. It's like, do you want a 1970s Marshall JCM?
Yeah.
Well, I've got one.
Well, that's kind of what Spark were trying to do, wasn't it? With the Spark amp originally, they were trying to create this kind of community-driven like tone library where you could basically, because I remember when I saw it, now when I saw the demos and I was reading about it, they were kind of pitching it as every single guitar amp ever created and guitar tone is basically now yours in this smart amp. And that was kind of like the idea that got everybody excited, but like the actual execution of that idea was, well, it didn't go that well. So something like this is, with the community element too, is really cool. And that one you just sent me, that's cheap as well. It's only like $180.
And it's the size of a guitar pedal. And I think you can hold up to 3 different amplifiers on it. And then you can hit the Alt button to change them. But it has everything that you need right there. It has the bass, the mids, the treble, and a big gain knob right in the middle of it. So you can dial in your capture however you want.
So how would you record it? Obviously, it's dependent on the quality of your recording, or do you go direct into it?
So you go direct into it with a reamp box.
Okay.
So the same way that we would in a studio, you would have a dry track, what we call a dry track. And it's a guitar with no effects, no distortion, nothing on it. It's your direct track.
Yeah. And
we keep that in the studio just in case your amplifier sound is bad. We could run it through an amp sim and make it sound better.
Okay.
So and like that way you don't have to replay it or anything.
So if
you've already got your performance.
Yeah, and if you do like one really, really like sick take and you're like, I couldn't do that again, you've got it, albeit dry.
Yeah, but I mean, then I can run it through any pedal I want. I can run it through any amplifier I want. So it uses that same technology, but instead of just running it straight through, it captures the sound.
Wow.
But at this point, the community has, hundreds and hundreds. And you could load your own speaker IRs into it. So if you have an IR that you already like, that you use on all of your other digital stuff. I mean, this is kind of like the real promise of what digital was supposed to be. Like you were talking about the Spark amp and Line 6 stuff. This is kind of fulfilling that promise because this isn't like a digital recreation of your amp. This is your amp. Yeah,
it's providing a level. It's actually useful and it's practical and it's not reliant on presets and stuff like that. It's basically like you have all this gear. Because a lot of the time it seems to be it's either or at the moment. The debate's always like you have this or you have that. You have an amp or you use amp synths. So this is kind of like the perfect middle ground where, you can have both and it makes it easier for traveling as well. So for instance, if you're a complete like tone freak with your amps and stuff and you go on tour, and you've got 2 that you really like, but you don't fancy lugging them, you're sorted. And then also with the library as well, for like people who don't have mountains of amps at home, that's a really cool feature that you can just basically download it and get that perfect sounding tone straight through this little thing.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Exactly. I mean, and then you can dial it in however you want. I mean, the capture is just a capture. So if you want to add more gain, you can. If you want to plug up other pedals to this, and add reverb or delay or chorus or, anything that you want to add to it, you just put this pedal in your chain of effects. And then you can run that pedal into a preamp. And that's all you need.
That's incredible.
Or I guess you could go through an FR speaker because that has a preamp built into it. And then, you have, with the Tone X1, you're kind of limited to what you load onto there. But honestly, do you really need more than 2 or 3 amps live?
No. Christ, I think that's the thing. It's most people, even like the real big names that are playing today, they probably only have a couple that they play through, realistically.
Right. Like I'd want a really good Fender clean and then a really good, maybe like a Marshall or a 5150, something that I could dial the gain in the way that I want it.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'd want a really good clean sound and a really good dirty sound. And I think I could play any show with that Tone X.
Yeah, well, I mean, the last big band I saw was Tool last time they were over here, and I was quite surprised by how little gear in terms of sort of hardware, like amps and stuff, that Adam Jones was actually using. He had, I think it was 3, maybe 4 amps, but that was it. And on the stage at the MEN, which is a huge stage, it just looked like a little practice amp.
Well, I mean, he technically that's only 2. Because he's running his guitar stereo.
Yeah.
So 4 amps would actually be 2. And he uses one for clean and one for the dirty stuff. But yeah, he runs it in stereo, so that way the delay effects and stuff sound more trippy because they bounce back and forth on both sides of the stage.
Oh, right. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah,
he's always amazing. Ran his stuff stereo. He's always ran 2 Marshalls going really hard in stereo because, I mean, it does change the sound of reverb and delays and stuff like that. But yeah, it does look small on a huge stage like that, doesn't it?
It really does. It really was. Because I was we were right at the front as well, so I could kind of just see him, see the sweat beads on his cheek as he was playing, and I was kind of looking at his gear and watching him play. It was really weird. He messed up like a couple of times, and I would never have noticed it, but I was kind of watching him a lot more intently because we were closer, and he messed up like a couple of parts, and I suppose that happens quite a lot. But if you're not really watching something closely, because you're miles away and you can't really see anything, but we were right up there, and I can't remember what it was. I think it was one of those pull-offs in Jambi, and he kind of just did it wrong, and you could see him just kind of go, ugh. Like his face, he just kind of pulled this funny face and then just carried on. Because it must be
that's
terrifying.
What pros do. Pros just keep playing.
Well, you've got to. I mean, there's about 16,000 people there, so but I guarantee you, like less than probably about 5 people noticed it.
It might have been you that made him mess up. He was like, who is this kid in the front row that is just staring me down?
Yeah, not moving, just staring, just maintaining constant eye contact whenever I look up.
It's like when you're trying to pee and someone's standing too close to you in a urinal.
Oh yeah.
It's like, dude, get away. That's what you were, that guy.
Yeah, well, that's the really annoying thing. I have a real pet peeve about urinal talk because. Yeah, I don't know if this is a thing in the States, but in the UK, you'll go to the toilet, and they're always disgusting in the UK, public toilets and pubs and bars. And you go to the urinal, and you'll be stood there, obviously, and you want to have you're peeing quiet. And then some guy, there's always, without fail, some guy will come stand right next to you and start talking to you, and you're just like, what? Why are you talking to me here? Because, and it's always this certain type of dude as well. It's always like a really kind of aggro kind of guy, like, oh, no, yeah. Whereas if you came up to him at the bar and started talking to him, he'd think you were weird. So it's like, but you're doing it in a toilet. So
that's no different here.
Yeah, and this happens everywhere. It happens in London, Leeds, Manchester. Doesn't matter where you go. It's just a thing, and it's like a proper pet peeve of mine because it's just, if I'm taking a leak, I don't particularly want to talk to the guy standing next to me. It's just, you just kind of want to get in there and get it done and get out because they're not always nice places to be.
It's always the guys too that. I'll pick the very last urinal. So, there's no one else in the bathroom but me. And I go to the very last one. And let's say that there's 6 or 8 of them in a row. And I swear the guy always comes right next to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are you doing?
How starved for attention is this guy? Must
he's be. Like, good band tonight. Huh?
Yeah, I live alone.
It's a really good band, huh? Yeah, I live alone.
I live alone. It's weird.
Got
it's
a couple cats.
Yeah.
What are you talking about, man?
Yeah, I'll show you a picture of him on my pea-stained phone. Yeah, no, it's weird. And you get it on the bus as well. Like in London, I used to work in London. You used to get the bus everywhere and the tube. The bus, but this only happens on the bus where you'd be sat on the bus and it'd be, every once in a blue moon you get on a bus and it wouldn't be busy and you're like, oh great, so you can actually relax, and then someone would get on and sit next to you and you're like, what? There's a whole bus here and you're sat next to me. There's 20 seats in front of me, 10 back. It's just like, what is going on? It's weird.
I don't understand the psychology of that. Because I purposely, if I get on the subway in Atlanta, I purposely pick out a spot to where I clearly don't want to be messed with. Like and my body language says it and everything. Why do you come sit right beside me? Like,
Yeah.
why? You
And
know,
then
and
talk about the
especially
weather.
the tram is empty. The entire tram has like 4 people on it, and then you sit next to me and start talking about your family. I don't
Yeah.
know. Maybe we're just getting to that age, dude. Are we like crotchety old men?
No, well, you see, I grew up in like a small town, so I kind of get the whole talking to people. But the difference in a small town is kind of most people know each other, so it's not that bad. But yeah, there's a couple of things that just sitting next to someone on a bus when there's plenty of available seats is a big no-no, and also talking to somebody when they're going to the toilet is just it's just weird. Like but it's the thing I've noticed, and we could be at a pub and I'd be chatting to my friends about it. I'd mention it and they'd be like, yeah, that happens all the time. And I'm like, it does. It's like a thing. But no one, but it's one of those things that just happens so often. People don't seem to pay much attention to it. But when you actually bring it up, it disgusts everybody equally. Everyone's like, yeah, I really don't like it. It makes me feel really uncomfortable. And it's like,
so who's doing it?
Yeah, who are these guys? Yeah, I don't know. It's like some weird like rogue agents in the simulation that is going around putting men off in bathrooms. It's just weird. It's very bizarre. But yeah, it's one of the pitfalls. It's worse than this pub I used to work in, used to go to when I used to work in central London. It was across the road, this really old pub, and then everybody on a Friday night would like pile in there from all the different like publishing houses, and BBC was around the corner into this kind of like, it was a big pub, but the toilet, I'm not joking, it was just the stuff of nightmares. Like you go in and there was basically 2 kind of like big, like one urinal down the wall and one like toilet in a stall, and that was it. And there's about 300, 400 people in this pub. Everyone's drinking beer.
Oh, no.
So when you got in there, it was like crossing streams. It was like, piling one up on top of the other. It was, oh my God. I imagine what's like going through a wee in hell is like. It's that bad. It's so bad. So bad. And so much small talk. So, it's a bit tight here, isn't it? It's like, oh God, shut up. I just want to get out of here.
Not to talk about bathrooms too much longer here, but it's funny because have you ever been on the other end of the spectrum? So like I went to a really nice wedding about 2 years ago, and I mean like it was an expensive wedding. Like this wedding cost as much as I paid for my house. Like that kind of wedding. Right. And the bathrooms had 2 attendants.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
They have like the towel guy, and then they have the soap guy and everything. And I guess you're supposed to tip them. I don't know. I gave them a $5 bill because I didn't know what to do. So
just don't make eye contact and get out of there.
I guess that's I don't know. Is that what you're supposed to do? But yeah, that's even weirder because like the entire time I'm standing there and I'm trying to, I don't know, I'm a very pee shy person and I'm trying to pee and I can't because like these guys
rubbing his hands in the corner. Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah, they're like standing over there. It's so weird, man.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, that is a thing over here. It's not very common, but it does happen. But like tipping is a weird thing here because in the States, people tip because you don't have minimum wage, or you didn't traditionally, and people workers get screwed out of loads of money. So that's my phone going off. That's not good.
It wouldn't be an episode without it. No,
and but over here we've had minimum wage for forever, but tipping's now become a thing. So it's kind of weird because you never really know. Like it's not a done thing. You're not brought up to tip people, but kind of people expect it sometimes. And you're just like, well, you're getting paid loads. Well, not loads, but relatively speaking, for what you're doing. But the toilet guys they operate on tips. But I'm just like, I don't know how you get into that racket in the first place. Like, we need a guy to stand in the toilet with some refreshments for the men. Who's up for it? And it's like, side duties may include unblocking toilets. It's just, yeah. I mean, I've worked in a lot of like public, service trade stuff, but when I was younger and over the years, like at uni and when I first moved to London, but yeah, never got into the toilet racket. I don't know. Maybe that's where all the money is. Who knows?
I mean, they have to be able to afford those suits somehow. So over there, you guys, like your waiters, are paid by the hour?
Yeah. You get it's minimum wage in the UK. So, you work in anywhere, like a pub or a restaurant or whatever, and you get minimum wage.
Yeah, so here it's if someone is your bartender or someone is your server, that's
you have
tipping is all their money. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember I've been to the States loads of times, and I'm one of these people that never has cash on me because I just use my phone, and that's been the case for like a long time now. And every time I go to the States, it's always like a thing. It's always like you have that uncomfortable bit where you have to kind of wait for and that awkward bit where you go, well, I don't actually have any cash on me, and they kind of just go, oh, okay, bye. And that was it. That's my whole experience of being an American, staying in hotels, is just having uncomfortable conversations with people in hotels about why I don't have any cash on me and I haven't got anything for them, and they kind of just look at me and go, oh, no. And then when they see you again later, they're like, oh, it's this guy. It's like, I've got to do stuff for this guy. It's cashless Rick.
Well, beyond bathrooms and beyond tipping, our episode today is about our favorite producers. Last week we had a special episode, and that was all about, that was the week before that, but that was all about our favorite composers. And so this isn't really a special episode today, but we did want to talk about some producers, and I know who you're going to say right off the bat. But let's try to go back a little bit. Like, I'm going to start with the 80s, but I already know who you're going to say.
Who am I going to say?
You're going to say Kurt Ballou.
Yeah, he's my favorite modern one, because I think he's kind of like, he's one of the only guys that can seem to like harness the actual sound of a metal band anymore.
I mean, that Cave-In album from 2 years ago was an amazing
like Russian Circles, full of hate, full of
his own
full of hell. Yeah, Converge. God, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's just so many. There's just he's got his rap, that Mutoid Man, All Pigs Must Die, Sumac, High on Fire. He just I think if you're recording metal and you're not recording with him, you're really like missing a trick, because Dillinger's Gay Plan, he just gets the sound that you need, that's missing, I think, because there's a lot going on with it. Because he's a sound engineer and he does the production as well. So the drums sound like ungodly heavy, and the guitars always sound like phenomenal. And the mix is always really good, and it's heavy when it should be heavy, and when it's not mellowed and there's like a breakdown, it's got that like organic, like warm hiss to it that you just don't seem to get anymore. I don't know whether that's the fact, because I'm not, you're the kind of the production guru, but I don't know whether it's because he's not so heavy on the compression. He just kind of lets things go a little bit, lets a little bit more out, a little bit more air out of them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I think he doesn't add a whole lot to the production. I don't think. I think he spends a lot of time setting up the microphones the way that they need to be.
Yeah, it's capture. He's like capturing the sound. Like the band knows what they want it to sound like, because they have the gear and they know what they're doing. And then he's
more of an engineer.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. He's kind of like Steve Albini in that.
I was going to say he's him and Steve Albini. They're very similar. I don't know if they're similar in their approach, but the aesthetic of the sound that they have, when I listen to their records, it's quite hard for me, because I don't think I could pick a Kurt Ballou record out of the box, but when I hear it and I'll check the band out, if it's something I haven't heard for a while, or a band I haven't heard of, and I'll check out the Wikipedia page for who produced it and stuff, I'll be like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense, it is him, because they all kind of have this like this sound, this like Kurt Ballou sound to them, which is just this hugely aggressive, big sound that he's kind of, and there seems to be a lot of, I can't really describe it. There's a lot of, it seems like he lets more stuff into the mix. He doesn't seem to just cut stuff out and filter things out that might not sound, so it doesn't sound perfect. Has imperfection in it, but it sounds like it's there for a reason, and it adds to the sound rather than detracting from it.
I think so too, and I think that's how he is compared to Steve Albini, because I think he's like a technician.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what Steve Albini always says. He says, I'm not a producer, I'm a technician. I'm going to set up the microphones. I'm going to capture you at your best. And that's what the album's going to sound like. And I love that approach because, I mean, I love that letter that he wrote to Nirvana that circled around the internet a couple of years ago.
Okay, no. Refresh my memory on that.
Yeah, it's pretty much their contract. And so Kurt Cobain wrote to him and said, hey, I love that PJ Harvey album that you did. It sounds so raw. And I would love to have you on. And so he sends this long-winded letter about how he doesn't want royalties, he doesn't want credits, he doesn't want producer points, which was a big thing in the 90s.
Yeah.
He doesn't want any of that stuff. He wants $50,000 up front, and I think he wants $20,000 when the record's completed. He doesn't want any royalties off of that. This is my process. You guys are going to have to be tight. You're going to have to be good because you're going to come in, you're going to play. We've got 14 days to make this work, and I'm going to set up everything, and it's going to be awesome. Are you in?
No way. I bet he's kicking himself he didn't get any royalties there.
No, he says he doesn't. He doesn't feel like that at all. No.
Yeah, I wouldn't feel like that on like a Deftones record or something, but on a Nirvana record, then, you're talking quite a lot of sales there.
The last Nirvana album, yeah.
Yeah, in Utero, yeah. And it sounds bloody good though, that album. That's probably my favorite album of theirs. I know everyone goes about Never and stuff, but that one's flawless.
They're two different types of albums. Nevermind is a commercial sounding album, and it's very polished. And there's an art to that. And that's what I was going to get into talking about the 80s with Mutt Lange. Mutt Lange was very much like that with Def Leppard and the bands that he produced. But so that's one type of style. But then the other type of style is the other end of the spectrum, and that's what Steve Albini does. And it's just the band. That's what they said. That's what Nirvana sounded like live.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they sounded like when they were playing, and he captured that. And it sounds great. I mean, he did minimal overdubs.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry, cut you off there. No, one of my favorite albums of all time is Times of Grace by Neurosis, and he did that, and I mean, I've seen them play that live all the way through, and that is, it's how they sound. And he managed to capture that record, and the heaviness of that is, I mean, live, it's orders of magnitude heavier, but it comes across. You get that album on vinyl through a good system, like a good hi-fi system, and you crank it. It literally will shake your house. It's that good. It's that well recorded, and that's an old album as well. You're talking maybe 25, 30 years old.
Yeah.
It's got to be
an older album. Yeah,
it's got to be.
That came out in the 90s. Yeah.
He did the Eye of Every Storm as well. He's kind of like their go-to producer. I mean, the Eye of Every Storm is again one of my favorites. It's
a great album.
It's so good. I mean, that was not like their watershed moment, but because I think Times of Grace is really good. Through Silver Blood, it's really good. But I really like the Eye of Every Storm. I think that's the one that's kind of sort of. You can still listen to it now and you're like, because it's quite accessible because it's a bit more proggy, even though it's very heavy in parts. Whereas Times of Grace is still when they were doing their quite nasty stuff. Not nasty, but they were quite heavy, quite aggressive. Whereas the Eye of Every Storm is very more subdued, a bit more slow, and there's lots of stuff going on there. But I absolutely love that album.
It's weird how productions changed, though. And I think that the album that kicked it off, and I just listened to it this morning while I was setting up my microphone and everything for the podcast to make sure I wasn't crazy. I listened to it through the studio monitors and everything. I listened to the first Boston album again.
Okay.
And Tom Schultz had this whole debate with the record company. The record company wanted him to go into a studio and record the band. And he was like, Yeah, but I've got all of that at home. And so he swindled the record executives and told them, oh, yeah, we're going to the studio and it's going to sound great. But that whole first album was recorded in his basement.
No way. So he basically just called him out and lied.
And yeah, and he took the money for the studio stuff, and said, yeah, we're booking in LA. Yeah, absolutely. And, back then, there wasn't email or anything like that. You had to actually physically call people on the phone and send letters and stuff like that. So it was easier to get away with, pulling tricks like that. And he got away with it. But that first album kicked off a whole new era of recording. And people like Ted Templeman, who worked with Van Halen for their first 4 or 5 albums, and people like Mutt Lange, who did Pyromania by Def Leppard. It kicked off a whole new era of double tracking and making things sound big, because if you go back to like Led Zeppelin, some of those songs really, really rock, but it would sound better if the guitars were double tracked. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right, it would. There's that, yeah. That's the thing with Zeppelin and stuff of that era, that it was kind of just before you kind of production kind of came not as integral as the music, but became like a more creative act, I think.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Zeppelin does when you listen to it now, you're like, God, someone could do like a, even I'm sure someone's done it on YouTube where they just double track the guitar anyway and just mix it. But to get that from, that sound natively from that era would have been like phenomenal, because some of the guitar parts he does, I mean, even like on the acoustic tracks of when Jimmy Page, because he's a phenomenal acoustic guitar player, and like some of the tracks when you're just like, oh, like it sounds amazing now. Like if you add some like production flair to it that came like 10, 15 years later, it would have sounded just, I mean, even better than Led Zeppelin. That's a hard thing to do.
Right. But unfortunately, at the same time, that kind of led things down a really bad path. After we get past like 1986 or 1987, you had like all of these bands that sounded the same. And I'm specifically talking about rock and roll and heavy metal, because those first, Black Sabbath albums after Dio joined, let me think of another good example. Def Leppard, of course. Van Halen, of course. But all of those albums influenced everyone else to the point to where everything was kind of homogenized. And that's why grunge got so big, because people were so tired of hearing these bands where you could hear 10 different bands on the radio and they all sounded the same up until like Nirvana.
Yeah, totally.
And that's why people loved Pearl Jam and Nirvana and Alice in Chains, because it was not only just a new sound, but it sounded like a band playing again.
It was DIY. It was the new punk, wasn't it? It was like the second wave of punk, but it wasn't punk. It was grunge. But it was. It
really was.
But it was the same. It came from the same creative space where people are just like, everything's too polished, everything's too by the number. Screw it. Let's just make some noise and change the way things work. And it's true. I think we're kind of getting to there again. I think we're due another switcheroo, because everything's kind of quite similar sounding now.
Well, you do have people
plateaued.
You do have people like Kurt Ballou who are doing a good job. My favorite modern producer is probably Will Putney. He did the last Every Time I Die album. He did the Norma Jean album, All Hail. Who
did a bunch of stuff. Who did Memphis Will Be Laid to Waste, the 2002 one? It was Kurt, that was Kurt, wasn't it?
You know what? I have no idea.
I think it was. I'm going to have to check that, because that album's great. I didn't really listen to much of their new stuff after that, but that one album, I remember when it came out, I was like, oh my God. Because it was in the UK, that was the start of the, like, Jun, that sort of like chug, wee riff that was quite big in the early 2000s.
That was Adam Dutkowitz, who did Bless the Martyr and Kiss the Child. That came out in 2002. I wasn't a big fan of that album, actually, but I can see where that was.
I really liked that.
I liked everything after. After Corey became the singer, I liked everything after. Not just because he's from here, but that has a lot to do with it, too. He was already kind of like a local hero in the Georgia rock scene at the time, so him joining Norma Jean just made it even bigger. Now I guess he is Norma Jean. He writes everything. But yeah,
pretty much.
Well, Will Putney did one of their albums. Will Putney's done a lot of really good albums, and he gets this drum sound that is just amazing. Like that last Every Time I Die album, Radical, was so good. And I hated that they broke up. Like they released that album, they literally broke up right after they released it. I don't even think that they toured for it. But everything sounds so heavy on that album. And he got them to do that double drop A trick with the guitars where you tune both of the bottom strings to A. Yeah. And it sounds like a big sludgy octave, you know? And he got them to tune down for the first time and everything. I don't know. I like Will Putney a lot because he's not replacing every drum sound with a sample and snapping it on a grid, you know?
Yeah. I think that approach is, it's like you say, it's capturing a moment, I think. And I think that's what Albini and Kurt Ballou and this do well, because they know if a band like Nirvana or Cave In or Neurosis or Yob or whoever, they know what they're doing. They're not just going, well, you know, what do you think we should do this bit here or this bit here? They come in with a vision of how they want it to sound. They've kind of pretty much got it down in the practice space, and they've got the gear. So they just need someone to make sure it's captured correctly, I think. And that's kind of the big difference, because you now it's the role of sound engineer versus producer, because a producer is sometimes they're part of the creative process. And then you have people like Rick Rubin, who isn't technical at all. Like he's not a sound engineer. He doesn't really play any instruments. He's kind of just more of like a Bob Lasso kind of guy. Around,
that sounds good.
Maybe
good.
Try which is an odd thing, but he's managed to, he's worked on some of the most well-known records of all time with a huge array of people and bands and artists. So
Beastie Boys, Chili Peppers, lots of really good artists.
Yeah, he's got a huge roster.
Slayer.
So I was going to say Slayer as well. Can you just imagine him being like, "Yeah, I like that, Kerry. It's nice. It's good." Yeah.
He did a Slayer album and I want to say a Chili Peppers album in the same year. How weird must that have been?
I don't know.
You go in and you do Slayer, and then you do Beastie Boys, or you do Chili Peppers.
But what I can't understand is that if you're not a technician, like kind of like Steve Albini, and you're not like a producer, and a producer would, in my eyes, is somebody who, you do music, you'd have to have some kind of grounding basis in it. Whereas he's more of he's kind of an ear. He's like, well, I like, he knows what sounds good, but it's hard. It's very difficult to see how anyone like now could have a career like that doing without any of, the actual kind of bona fide credentials that most people would look for. So I need to read his book, actually, because I don't know enough about the guy. I know bits and bobs about him not being able to do this and not being able to do that and being very hands off. I can't remember who it was. I read an interview with him and they basically said that he just turn up and be like, yeah, sounds pretty good. Why don't you try that? Okay. And then they weren't particularly impressed. But I can't remember who it is or what band it was.
I think it's good for bands like the Chili Peppers and like the Beastie Boys, who probably do have their stuff together. But then you have, with the Beastie Boys, you had 3 very type A personalities that probably butted heads a lot. I know the Chili Peppers for a fact. John Frusciante he thinks he runs that band. Anthony Kiedis thinks he runs that band, and Flea thinks that he runs that band, and then Chad Smith is just kind of stuck there in the middle.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Just glad he's not a fluffer anymore.
So he's a good Rick would be a good person for someone like that, or like Slayer, where Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman were polar opposites in their songwriting, but you need someone to kind of tell one of those people no.
Yeah, and that's like the hands-on thing, isn't it? But that's like George Martin. He was with the Beatles. He was very much like that. He was almost like a father figure to them. He helped them. He showed them stuff. He was inspiring them. But he was also a technician. He had all the gear. He knew how to use it, and he had a huge knowledge of music, composition, all that kind of stuff, which is part of the reason why they were so good and so innovative. Is because of him. And his role in their lives, showing them different types of music and classical music and things like that. Because a lot of the most outrageous things that they did came from George Martin, discussions they were having with George Martin or Paul McCartney. I've read Paul McCartney's autobiography last year. It's a really, really, really great read if you're interested in the Beatles and what it's like to be one of the most famous men in the world and one of the biggest bands in history. It's a really interesting book, but it's particularly stuff about the George Martin because he really was. Because Paul would be like, "Oh, I've got all these ideas, and I like Bach, and I like this, and blend them together." And he'd go, "Oh, we can do that. We can do that easy. I've got this thing called a sampler." And then he'd show him the sampler, and then they'd load stuff in, and he'd go, "Wow!" He just he had the, he had the technical knowledge of what was possible and even what wasn't possible, and then but how you could make it possible by sort of wiring and jigging things together.
And I didn't know that until I saw the documentary.
Oh, the one on the Peter Jackson one.
Yeah, I had no idea that George Martin was so involved in the process of making Let It Be. It was almost like he was a member of the band, like you said.
I think he was more or less. He was kind of like, he was a lot older than them, and he was kind of he was like a mentor, producer, sound engineer, confidant, a muse. He was just somebody they could bounce ideas off. And I mean, he was integral. He is basically the glue that held them together from the very beginning until obviously towards the end it wasn't so much. But right. Yeah, it was him. He was effectively not the driving force behind it, but he saw what they could do and what they were going to do, and he was like, "I've got all the gear," and these people want. It's a real, when stuff happens like that, when people meet like that together at a certain point in history, it's kind of almost like it's meant to be in a way, because it puts a dent in the universe. It doesn't happen very often, but that's a really good instance of what happens when you put some people together. Because if he wasn't there and he wasn't a present in their lives at the beginning, I don't think they ever would have done what they ended up doing.
I don't think so either. So I guess at the end of the day, it's going to be personal preference. But if you're into recording and you're into music and you're watching this on YouTube, especially, first of all, 90% of you guys are not subscribed. So hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything. It's not like we post every single day. We're not going to fill up your feed. We only post twice a week. So, yeah, definitely subscribe. But if you're on YouTube especially, put in the comment section, who's your favorite producer? Maybe it was just for one album. Maybe it's for a long run of albums. Maybe it's someone like George Martin, who was with the band pretty much their entire career. Who's your favorite? Put it in the comments.
Phil Spector.
Sure. That's a controversial one. But
he actually worked on a Beatles album.
He did, and he did a great job. He did a great job on pretty much everything he ever did, but he also had a
from his ex-wife.
severe drug problem, and
he's in prison
with firearms. Right? He's still in prison.
Did he kill us? What did he do? I know he did. He went his murder, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I believe it was murder. Yeah.
Oh, disco.
Yeah, rough guy. Yeah, I think he's dead now. I think he's passed.
Oh. Well, he did some good work and did some good and some bad.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to look past that and be like, well, he did make some good albums. But yeah, especially if you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment. Let us know who your favorite producer is and why, and which albums they worked on, because this is something that I love digging into. I love finding a producer who's done a varied amount of artists, someone like Rick Rubin or someone like Mutt Lange, who worked with everybody in the 80s. So yeah. Richard, do you have anything else that you want to add before we...
No, but the YouTube thing, definitely get in the comment section and drop us your suggestions, because there's some people that were producers from back in the day that were so big, and now you never even hear about them. Like Ross Robinson, he was like the guy in the late 90s, early 2000s. Like he was doing everything, and now
he did Korn. Yeah,
I haven't even heard his name mentioned. I haven't even seen his name mentioned in anything for probably about over 20 years. I don't even know if he's doing music anymore, but it's crazy how stuff can go and it can change quite quickly. And one thing that always gets me is when you have a band that you really like that's got quite an extensive back catalogue. And a really good example of this is Opeth. And you listen to like their earlier albums, which are a bit scratchy with production wise, but they're still really good. And then you put on like Blackwater Park, which I think is one of the best produced metal albums of all time. It sounds absolutely like it's almost perfect sounding, I think, personally, to my sort of tastes. And then you listen to their latest album, and it's like night and day. And it's really bizarre that, considering the length of time between the two of them, how the older one can sound so much better than the new one. I always find that quite odd. With the new Metallica album, I know we keep banging on about how much we dislike this album, but the sound is just not good. And so progression with technology is always happening, but it's not necessarily always a good thing, I don't think, because it can be overdone. You can't undercook things. I mean, with the example of the new Metallica album, I mean, everybody hates Saint Anger album, but I would literally rather listen to Saint Anger on repeat all day than sit through that new album like once. Seriously, that's how much I dislike it.
That's brutal.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely leave a comment then and let us know your favorite albums and your favorite producers and give us a reason why. And we respond to pretty much every comment. Yeah, drop us a line. Let us know what you think. Otherwise, we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.